Robert Mueller disputing a BuzzFeed report that claimed the president had instructed Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, to lie to Congress about a prospective business deal in Moscow. Joining me now, Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist, Brian Darling, Republican strategist, and Sabrina Schaefer, political consultant. Welcome to all of you. Basil, you first. What's your take on this move by Mueller?
Well, it's extraordinary that you'd have the special counsel challenge the veracity of a story. But my guess is that it was done because if you notice, there's a lot of talk about impeachment coming right afterwards. It's probably a way to sort of slow things down a bit so the country didn't get hurled into some sort of chaos. But again, the fact that we're even having this conversation suggests that there is an incredible appetite for whatever the Mueller investigation will ultimately show and what they will ultimately reveal. But unfortunately, what this has done is given the president a little more ammunition to sort of go after the media. But I think it's important for Democrats to just sort of, again, wait, be patient, and still focus on the work ahead of us.
So, Brian, this report being the first of its kind that Mueller has felt that he has to dispute in this manner, what can we deduce about all the other reports on the Russia probe? We've heard nothing from Mueller about those. So does that allow us to presume that those were correct?
Well, I think what we do know is that the BuzzFeed story was incorrect. I mean, this is the first time we've ever seen the special counsel's office respond. Yet, that report triggered Democrats into their favorite thing, talking about impeachment. But if you look at the other news reports, I think, we need to read these and understand that we need to wait. I mean, we're going to see the Mueller report at some point. It seems like this is an endless investigation that will never actually produce a report. But at some point, we'll see it. We'll get to understand what the facts are. We'll see a lot of the news stories be debunked. Some will be confirmed. But ultimately, I think Democrats need to just stop talking about impeachment. I mean, clearly they love to talk about it. And this story is something that we should all look at and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't believe BuzzFeed as much as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the Washington Post.
Okay, I want to switch gears here, starting with you, Sabrina, because Congressman Steve King was rebuked this week, pretty much stripped of all committee assignments. It's because of his white supremacy comments in a recent New York Times interview. The president praised Steve King before and also during rallies, said that he was a nationalist. Do Republicans need to respond more forcefully to the president in this regard?
Yeah, I think they absolutely do. Look, I think Ross Douthat at the New York Times sort of hit the nail on the head this week about this, that the Republicans have allowed this to sort of come to the surface, this sort of racism and bigotry in a way that I think a lot of sort of mainstream Republicans or right of center, policy analysts and things were a little bit surprised by. And now there's going to be pressure, I think, on both sides. I think we're seeing a sort of a percolating of anti-Semitism on the left. We're seeing sort of bigotry and racism on the right. Both parties are going to have to really sort of get beyond their partisanship and the policy prescriptions they want and sort of squash that on the margins before it becomes mainstream, because unfortunately on the right it has become a little bit too mainstream that it's in the White House.
What do you think, Basil, the King situation overall handled correctly or too much? I mean, was he punished sufficiently?
Well, first of all, I don't think he was punished sufficient. Well, I think he was punished sufficiently in the sense that Democrats now in power did everything they needed to do to sort of isolate him. And I think that was incredibly smart and the right thing to do. Did it need to happen previously? Absolutely. I don't, to your question before, I don't think Republicans have done enough, and I quite frankly don't think they would do enough to really challenge the president's own comments on these issues. I'll push back a little bit on what was just said. I don't want to associate anti-Semitism with the left. I want to be very clear that that's not something that is indicative or prevalent among Democrats or liberals. But I will say that the anti-Semitism and racism that is becoming much more, I don't want to say pervasive because I think a lot of it was already there, but the fact that we're seeing it and hearing it more is because of the way that people have allowed this president to set the tone and to set this atmosphere and this climate. And that's what we need to push back on.
Well, listen, whatever the genesis of it, it is very, very disturbing. But to you, Brian, my question is, why have Republicans been largely silent on the president and his various comments?
Well, they haven't. I mean, Mitt Romney's been outspoken.
Right.
I think when the president makes mistakes...
But you know what, Brian? We're talking about Mitt Romney, and I'm presuming that you're going back to the op-ed that he wrote, which was remarkable, and it generated a lot of conversation for its strength and its uniqueness. I'm saying in general, you know, with Mitt Romney being a bit of an outlier, why is it that the average rank-and-file Republican does not repudiate the president for things that he has said?
Well, I think he has been. I really do. I think in certain times when he stepped over the line, I think Republicans have said, hey, we don't agree with that. I mean, look at the Democrats. The Democrats did not do anything to push back on one of their own freshman members, calling the president of the United States an MFer. I mean, that is over the line. I can't tell you how many times we've seen Democrats call all Republicans racist, and that's over the line, or use the Nazi and call Republicans Nazis.
Brian,
you hear it all the time from the left, but nobody pushes back.
Somebody I'm thinking from the right, I'll let you get in a second, Basil, but someone I'm thinking from the right who pushed back is Bob Corker. Oops, he's gone.
Right.
That was his own choice. He didn't run for re-election.
Right. I know, but I do think there's been a challenge in that there was 8 years in which Republicans were waiting to push through their tax policy, to make changes to health care, to changes to energy and the environment. And so there's a lot of Republicans who are sort of turning a blind eye. I agree. I think it's bad. I think it's a bad strategy. But I think there are a lot of people who are thinking we can just sort of turn a blind eye to that, and we'll push through these sort of market-based policies that we all agree on, and ultimately this will go away. And I think that is, you know, maybe some people sort of thought they could swallow hard and do that initially, but I do think that there's a point at which more right-of-center people need to stand up and say, and Basil, you know, that's just simply not sufficient.
Basil, you jump in on this as well real quick.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a false equivalency to compare what Democrats have done and said about this president and the president from on high, from his office, condoning a lot of the behavior that we've seen, Charlottesville in particular, but that's not all of it. The rhetoric, the language, even in our conversations about the wall on a policy issue, how he's demonized immigrants in this country, that is not something that you see on the left.
So, well, I would disagree with that. I mean, I'm sorry, but just to be clear, there's plenty of sort of pushing the anti-Semitism on the left under the rug. I mean, I work with women's groups all the time. I was with a lot of different women last night speaking at an event, and there's a lot of sort of willingness to say, oh, that doesn't really happen. But the reality is it is happening. We do see it, and, for instance, in the leadership of the Women's March.
You know what? May I just ask you very quickly? I've got 15 seconds. The Women's March. What are your expectations, Sabrina?
Well, I think it's going to be a smaller crowd. I think that while there are challenges in America for women in terms of the workplace, and I think we need to talk about criminal justice reform, and I think there's a lot of issues, but life in America is pretty good. And I think, unfortunately, the Women's March has sort of tried to paint this picture of women versus men, and that's just not flying with as many women today.
All right, so Basil, Brian, Sabrina, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Gauging the latest